The royal guard stood still, his eyes focused on the horizon, his uniform pressed perfectly, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Every inch of his being was a symbol of discipline and duty, and his unblinking gaze made it clear he was not to be disturbed. The job of a royal guard was one of high honor, but it was also one of isolation. They were responsible for protecting the royal family and maintaining a presence at the most important events. To the outside world, they were icons of strength, power, and precision. To those who observed from a distance, the royal guard seemed almost like statues, unmovable and untouchable. They never smiled, never spoke, and rarely showed any emotion. They were, in essence, the face of authority, and their job was to represent the dignity and pride of the monarchy. Tourists gathered around to take pictures, some hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the rare moments when a guard might break his stoic stance. But for the most part, the guards remained as unmoving as the stone statues that decorated the palace grounds. For the guards themselves, the routine was long and repetitive. They stood, often for hours, in one position, never breaking their composure, never acknowledging the crowd. The world around them moved. People came and went, but they stood as if frozen in time, their eyes always forward, never allowing themselves to react to what was happening around them. It was a life of silence, precision, and restraint. But beneath that cold, rigid exterior, the guards were human. They had their own stories, their own struggles, their own emotions. They experienced pain, loss, joy, and hope, just like anyone else. The uniform they wore, though imposing, did not erase the experiences they carried within themselves. Yet, in their position, there was no room for these emotions to show. There was no space for the softer side of life. The guard's job was to uphold the image of strength, unwavering in the face of everything that came their way. Over time, the guard had become so accustomed to this role that it was difficult to remember what it felt like to let go, to smile, to laugh, to be human. Every day, he would wake up early, put on his uniform, and head to his post, standing for hours in the same spot, silent and still. There was no room for mistakes, no room for distractions. The world around him moved on, but his job was to remain constant. People would walk by, some nodding their heads in acknowledgement, others snapping photos, fascinated by the sight of such a dedicated soldier. Children would wave, and adults would comment on how impressive it was that the guard never moved. But to the guard, it was all just part of the job. There was no joy in the attention. It was simply what he was there to do. The uniform represented something larger than himself. It was a tradition, a duty, an honor, and it had to be upheld with perfection. Still, on the rare occasions when no one was looking, he would allow his mind to wander. He would think of his family, his friends, his past. He would think of the loved ones he had lost, the moments of joy he had once experienced. But these thoughts never lasted long. The reality of his job was that the guard had no room for distractions. The world would continue moving, and he had to remain still, a figure of unwavering strength. But the truth was that deep down, the guard had a heart. And though he rarely showed it, it was there, beating quietly, waiting for a moment when it could break free. One chilly morning, as the sun slowly rose over the royal grounds, a frail woman, looking no older than her late 60s, approached the area where the royal guard stood. She had traveled from a small town, far from the bustling city, just to be near the palace, though she wasn't there to sightsee like most tourists. There was a quiet strength in her step, but the heaviness of her years was visible in her slow movements and the faint trembling of her hands. She carried with her a deep personal connection to the place she was about to visit. The woman paused for a moment to catch her breath, gazing up at the grand palace, its tall spires reaching into the sky. She had seen it once, many years ago, under much different circumstances. The memories flooded back to her in an instant, causing her heart to tighten. In the distant past, she had met a young soldier at a royal event. He had been full of life, charming and eager to serve. Their brief conversation had been one of those fleeting encounters that never fully left your mind, but she hadn't known then what would follow. The soldier had spoken to her with such warmth and kindness, making her feel as if she was the most important person in the room. But shortly after their conversation, the world had turned dark. The soldier she had met had been deployed to a dangerous mission, one that ended in tragedy. He never made it back, and she was left with only a memory of their brief interaction. The woman had never been able to forget him, and for years she had carried that memory with her, even though she never got to say goodbye. As she stood before the royal guard, the woman felt a deep yearning to pay her respects. She had often thought about the soldier, wondering what he would have been like had his life not been cut short. Would he have returned to the palace one day? Would she have seen him again, perhaps with his family, smiling in the crowd? The thought of that never came to pass, and the grief had stayed with her all these years. With a slow but determined step, the woman made her way toward the guard standing at attention. She knew he wouldn't speak to her, that he would maintain the same unreadable expression he always did. That was part of the job, part of the honor. But something about her presence seemed to catch his attention. Her eyes, filled with both sorrow and respect, met his. She didn't ask for anything, just a simple acknowledgement of the sacrifice that so many soldiers had made, including the young man she had known for only a short while. For a few moments, the woman simply stood there, unable to find the words she longed to speak. The quiet around them felt almost sacred, as if the palace itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The guard stood as unmoving as ever, but his eyes, just for a brief moment, softened. It was subtle, so subtle, in fact, that most people in the crowd wouldn't have noticed. But the woman did. She could see the way his gaze shifted, the way he acknowledged her presence without a single word. It was a silent connection between two souls, connected by the same painful loss. The woman's heart swelled with emotion. She had never expected such a reaction. The guards were trained to remain stoic, to stand tall and unyielding no matter the situation. Yet here, in this quiet moment, she felt as though she wasn't just standing in front of a statue, but in front of someone who truly understood the weight of her grief. A tear threatened to fall from her eye, but she quickly wiped it away, afraid to break the delicate moment. She didn't want to make the guard feel uncomfortable. She only wished to show her respect, to honor the young soldier who had lost his life too soon, and to acknowledge the silent sacrifice that people like the guard made every day. As the woman stood there, with the soft sunlight beginning to warm the cold morning air, something unspoken passed between them. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic words, just a quiet, shared understanding of loss, respect, and memory. She slowly turned away, her heart a little lighter, knowing that for just a fleeting moment, she had been seen. As the woman turned to leave, she couldn't help but look back at the royal guard one last time. She didn't know why, but something in that moment urged her to do so. Her heart felt full, as if she had been heard, even without speaking a word. The guard, still standing tall and silent, seemed to somehow acknowledge her, his posture unchanged, but his eyes reflecting a kind of understanding that left her feeling strangely comforted. For a moment, the world around them seemed to slow down. The bustling crowds of tourists, the distant sounds of carriages and footsteps, all faded into the background. It was as if time had paused just for them. The woman continued to stand there, her eyes locked with the guards, neither of them speaking but sharing an unspoken connection that both had needed, even if they didn't realize it until now. It was the kind of silent respect that could only come from those who had experienced pain, loss, and sacrifice. Though it only lasted a brief moment, it felt as if a silent bond had been formed between them. The woman wasn't sure why, but she felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the guard. It wasn't just because of what he had done by silently acknowledging her presence. It was something more profound. It was the recognition that even those who appear unshakable, those who wear armor and stand firm, have their own stories. They carry their own burdens. And that shared moment of human connection, no matter how fleeting, had touched her deeply. As she continued her walk away from the guard, she couldn't help but think about how often people saw the royal guards simply as symbols of power, authority, and protection. They were untouchable, unbreakable, and yet, here she had witnessed a side of them that was rarely seen by the public. Beneath the uniform and the rigid stance, there was humanity. The guards weren't just statues or instruments of defense. They were people with feelings, emotions, and experiences that shaped who they were. That realization made the woman feel a sense of awe. It reminded her that everyone had their own hidden depths, even those who seemed impossible to reach. The day moved on, and the woman continued her journey, but her heart felt a little lighter. She had come to the palace with a heavy burden, one that she had carried for many years. She had wanted to honor the memory of a young soldier whose life had been cut short, and in doing so, she had found a small but significant moment of peace. The royal guard, despite his stoic exterior, had shared a quiet moment of kindness with her, and in return, it had given her a sense of closure she had not expected to find. As the woman walked through the gates and out of sight, the guard remained at his post, his stoic expression back in place, his eyes forward once again. But there was something different about him now. Something had shifted, even if only slightly. He had felt the moment of connection as well. His training, his duty, his commitment to his role had not wavered, but something inside him had been stirred. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that there was more to his job than just standing at attention. There was meaning in his presence, in the small acts of kindness that could make a world of difference, even if they went unnoticed by many. The guard wasn't sure why, but as he stood there, watching the woman disappear into the crowd, he felt a sense of gratitude as well. In his own silent way, he had honored her, and she had honored him in return. And for that brief moment, they had shared something that went beyond the boundaries of their roles. It was a reminder that in a world filled with chaos and uncertainty, small gestures of kindness and respect could still break through, even in the most unexpected places. The day went on as usual. The guard resumed his duties, and life continued. But for both the woman and the guard, the memory of that moment would stay with them long after the crowds had gone. It was a reminder that even in the most rigid of routines, there was always room for humanity. And sometimes, breaking character was the most profound act of all. The royal guard stood in his usual spot, his eyes forward, his posture perfect, just as he had done countless times before. But something was different now. As the day went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him, something that was hard to define but undeniable. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it felt important. It wasn't the first time he'd experienced something similar, but it was the first time it had felt so personal. As he continued with his duties, the world around him seemed to blur. He wasn't sure if it was the lingering memory of the woman's presence or the quiet understanding they had shared, but he found himself lost in thought more than usual. The usual noise of the crowds and tourists seemed distant, and even the whispers from his fellow guards became background noise. All he could focus on was the quiet exchange they had shared. It was a reminder that despite the uniform, the duty, and the expectations, he was still human. He still had emotions, experiences, and a heart. The guard had never allowed himself to dwell too much on his personal life. His role required him to be steadfast, unwavering, and above all, controlled. But that day, something within him stirred. It was the kind of feeling that wasn't easy to ignore. He had stood in this very spot for years, guarding the palace with pride and honor. But it was moments like the one with the woman that made him question the deeper meaning of his duty. What did it all mean? Was his role just about standing still and being seen? Or was there more to it than that? He had always been taught that the guard's job was about service, about protecting the royal family, and upholding the traditions of the monarchy. And he had done so with dedication, without complaint, without ever once questioning the importance of what he was doing. But now, as he reflected on the woman's visit, he couldn't help but wonder if his job meant more than just guarding the palace. Maybe it was about providing a sense of connection to the people, showing them that there was more to the royal family and their guards than just the grandeur and formality that the world saw. The guard knew that his duty was one of great responsibility. People looked to him as a symbol of strength and power, a reminder of the royal lineage that had shaped the country's history. But in that moment, he realized that there was also power in the small, quiet moments, those times when he could show empathy and understanding, even if just for a fleeting second. He couldn't change the world, but he could offer respect, kindness, and perhaps, in his own way, a sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, the guard allowed himself to think about the people he had encountered over the years. The tourists who took pictures, the children who waved, the families who admired the history of the palace. He had always kept his distance, maintaining his role as a protector, as a symbol. But now, he wondered if those people saw him as just a figurehead, or if they, too, understood the depth of what it meant to stand there, day after day, with unwavering loyalty. It wasn't just about the uniform or the duties that came with it. It was about the connection he had with the world, even if it was an unspoken one. The woman had shown him that, in her own quiet way, she had come to honor a lost soldier, but in doing so, she had given him a gift. A reminder of the importance of compassion and human connection, even in the most formal and structured of settings. As the day continued and the sun began to set, the guard found himself standing a little taller. It wasn't because of the respect he demanded from others. It was because of the respect he had gained for himself. He had always been proud of his duty, but now he understood it in a new light. The moments of quiet connection, the moments of understanding, were just as important as any military duty or royal responsibility. The world around him continued to move, as it always did. But for the first time in a long while, the guard felt a deep sense of peace. He had been reminded of something simple but profound. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments that carry the most weight. And though his job would always be to stand strong and unyielding, he now understood that there was room for kindness, respect, and humanity in the most unexpected places. As the woman continued walking away, her heart felt lighter, but she couldn't help but glance back one more time, as though the moment she had just shared with the royal guard was something that needed to be etched into her memory. Something about that quiet exchange had touched her deeply. She knew it wasn't just the guard's gesture of acknowledging her grief, but something much more profound, something that connected them, even if only for a brief moment. The guard, standing as still as ever, had not broken his composure, but the woman could tell there was a shift in the air around him. There was no grand wave or any dramatic gesture, yet she felt that his silent nod had meant more than words could convey. It had been a simple act of kindness, so subtle, yet it had given her something she hadn't expected. In that moment, she had felt a deep sense of respect and recognition, not just for the soldier she had lost years ago, but for the man before her, standing tall and unwavering in his uniform. The woman's heart fluttered with emotion, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the guard. He had listened to her story without needing to speak, offering the kind of respect and understanding that she had yearned for so long. It was as though he, too, carried the weight of loss in his own way, and that silent connection, that quiet understanding, was enough to make her feel heard. It was all she had needed, to know that someone out there, even a stranger in uniform, could understand her pain. With a soft sigh, the woman wiped away the tear that had threatened to fall. She hadn't meant to cry, but the emotion that had welled up inside her was overwhelming. She hadn't expected to feel so moved by such a simple exchange. As she left the palace grounds, her mind replayed the moment over and over. The royal guard had given her more than she could ever express. He had given her a sense of closure, something that she hadn't realized she was seeking until now. Meanwhile, the guard remained at his post, the crowd moving around him, people continuing with their day as if nothing had changed. But for the guard, something inside him had shifted, even if only ever so slightly. As he stood there, he thought back to the moment when the woman had approached him. It had been a brief interaction, lasting only a few seconds, but it had made him realize something important. His role as a royal guard wasn't just about standing still, looking strong and authoritative. It was also about being present, about offering respect, compassion, and understanding to those who needed it, even if they were strangers. The guard had always been focused on his duty. He had been trained to be a symbol of strength, to remain unyielding no matter what happened around him. His focus had always been on the job, on protecting the royal family, on upholding tradition, and on standing guard with unwavering discipline. But now, he understood that there was more to his role than just being a statue of power. There was also power in the smallest of gestures, the simple act of acknowledging someone's presence, offering a moment of quiet understanding. For a long time, the guard had kept his emotions in check. He had told himself that his job was about duty, and nothing else mattered. But today, for the first time in a long while, he realized that duty didn't just mean standing still. It meant being human, too. It meant recognizing the weight that people carried, even if they didn't ask for help or expect anything in return. It meant showing kindness, even in the smallest ways, and offering respect to those who needed it most. As the sun began to set, casting a soft golden glow over the palace grounds, the guard stood there, lost in thought. He thought about the woman and the connection they had shared, the quiet understanding that had passed between them without a single word being spoken. It was a reminder that no matter how strict his training had been, there was always room for kindness, compassion, and empathy. The guard's duty remained the same. He would continue to stand, unmoving and silent, guarding the palace. But now, he understood that his role as a protector went beyond the physical. It was about the emotional connection, the ability to offer respect, and the quiet human moments that made all the difference in the world. And so, as the crowds gathered around him, oblivious to the small moment of humanity that had unfolded before them, the royal guard stood taller. His eyes remained fixed ahead, but in his heart there was a newfound understanding, a realization that breaking character, even just for a second, was sometimes the most profound way to show respect and kindness to another soul. It was a lesson that would stay with him, and with the woman, for the rest of their lives. The days passed by, and life around the royal palace continued as usual. Tourists filled the grounds, snapping photos of the towering walls and grand architecture. The royal guards remained in their spots, silent and still, performing their duty as always. But there was a subtle change, something that only a few could sense. The guard who had shared that brief but meaningful moment with the woman found himself reflecting on it more often than he had expected. It wasn't as if he had never performed his duty with dedication before. Of course he had. But now he saw his role through a new lens. The woman's visit had made him realize that what he did each day, standing tall, silent, and steadfast, was not just for show. It had purpose beyond what he had imagined. People came to see him not only because of his uniform or the tradition he represented, but because he embodied something deeper. He wasn't just a symbol of authority. He was also a symbol of the quiet strength and respect that many people sought in the world. As the guard went about his day, he began to notice the small things, things he had once ignored. He observed the families who walked by, holding hands and laughing, the children who waved up at him with wide eyes, and the elderly tourists who paused for a moment to catch their breath before continuing their walk. It seemed like every person who passed him had their own story, their own emotions. They didn't see him as just a statue or a figure in uniform. They saw him as part of the larger tapestry of the place. He was still doing his job, of course, standing guard, maintaining discipline, and protecting the royal family. But now he saw that part of his role was to represent more than just authority. It was about being present in those small moments that held so much meaning for the people who crossed his path. His stillness, his silent presence, could offer something more than just protection. It could offer peace, respect, and a reminder that even in the busiest of days, there was room for reflection, connection, and kindness. One afternoon, as the guard stood in his usual spot, he saw a young mother with her two small children walking towards him. The children were excited, pointing up at the palace and chatting happily about all the things they had seen. The guard watched them with quiet amusement, feeling a rare warmth fill his chest. The children were so full of life and wonder, their energy infectious. As they neared him, the little boy stopped in front of him and looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a real guard?" the boy asked, his voice filled with innocent curiosity. The mother, a bit embarrassed, quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, he's just so fascinated by the guards. We're just visiting." The guard smiled, a small, subtle gesture, but it was enough to put the child at ease. He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened, and he gave a slight nod, acknowledging the boy's innocent question. The child beamed with excitement, as though he had just been given the greatest honor. It was a simple exchange, but to the young boy, it meant the world. The mother smiled as well, grateful for the guard's kindness. It was moments like these that reminded the guard of the impact his silent presence could have. He wasn't just a figure standing at attention. He was part of something bigger, a small part of people's memories and experiences. As the mother and her children walked away, the guard felt a sense of pride. It wasn't because of the uniform or the role he played, but because in that brief moment, he had made a difference. He had offered something small but significant, a smile, a moment of kindness that would stay with that young family long after they left the palace. The interaction had made the guard reflect again on his purpose. In the past, he had been focused on duty alone, on the rigid expectations that came with being a royal guard. But now, he understood that his presence could be more than just a symbol. It could be a source of comfort, a reminder that there was humanity behind the uniform. He didn't need to speak or make grand gestures. Sometimes, simply being present was enough to show respect and kindness to those around him. As the sun began to set and the crowds thinned, the guard stood quietly in his spot. He thought about the woman from the other day, the one who had given him a glimpse into her heart. Her visit had awakened something inside him, a realization that even in the smallest of interactions, there was a deeper meaning. He wasn't just standing guard over a palace. He was standing guard over something much more profound, the dignity, respect, and humanity that connected everyone who passed by him, even for just a moment. As the weeks went by, the royal guard found himself reflecting on the moments that had shifted his perspective. He began to notice more and more how people interacted with him. He still stood at his post, unmoving and silent, but there was something different about the way he approached each day now. It was as though his role had taken on a deeper meaning. He wasn't just standing there as a figure of authority. He was standing there as a silent witness to the lives of those who walked past him. One afternoon, a young couple approached, hand in hand, with their eyes locked on the grandeur of the palace. They were deep in conversation, laughing and chatting as they walked along the pathway. As they got closer to the guard, the woman glanced up at him, noticing his tall figure and uniform. The guard met her gaze briefly, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. "Do you think they ever break character?" the woman asked softly to her partner, referring to the royal guards who stood like statues at their posts. Her partner smiled and whispered back, "I imagine they're always in character, no matter what." The woman's curiosity lingered, and as they passed the guard, she found herself thinking about the nature of his duty. She had always seen the guards as symbols, unwavering, unchangeable, and steadfast. They were the image of discipline and tradition, but she wondered if, behind the stern faces and rigid posture, there was more to their stories. Were they always in character, or was there a side to them that the public never saw? The royal guard didn't hear the conversation, but he felt the weight of the question. It wasn't unusual for people to wonder about him and the others who stood beside him. They often saw the uniform, the stoic faces, and assumed that the guards were unfeeling statues. But in reality, the guards were just people doing a job that required an immense amount of discipline, sacrifice, and dedication. Still, there was a human side to them, even if they didn't express it in ways others could easily see. The woman's question lingered in the guard's mind long after she and her partner had moved on. It made him think about how little people truly knew about the lives of the guards who stood in front of the palace day in and day out. He had always been taught to remain stoic and composed, but in the quiet of his own thoughts, he realized that there were moments when the mask of silence could crack, moments when he could offer more than just a silent watch over the palace. Not long after, a group of tourists arrived at the palace, excited to take in the sights and snap photos of the impressive architecture. Among the group was an older man, walking slowly with the help of a cane. His face was lined with age, and he looked around in awe, taking in every detail of the grand surroundings. As the group approached the royal guard, the elderly man paused, looking up at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The guard could see the man's tired yet kind eyes, and something in the man's expression made the guard stop for a moment. The elderly man wasn't just looking at a uniform, he was looking at something deeper, as though he could sense the humanity behind the guard's stillness. Without a word, the man gave a respectful nod, acknowledging the guard's presence. The guard, in return, offered a subtle bow of his head, acknowledging the silent respect between them. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. In that simple exchange, they both understood something without needing to say anything. As the group moved on, the elderly man continued walking slowly, but he glanced back once more at the guard. It was a moment that didn't draw attention to itself, but it was a meaningful one. The guard couldn't help but feel that the elderly man had seen him, not just as a soldier but as a person. It was a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments of connection happen without words. The guard's thoughts wandered as he stood there, looking out over the palace grounds. The world around him seemed full of stories he would never fully know or understand, but stories that he had become a part of simply by being there. Every person who walked by had their own journey, their own challenges, and their own triumphs. Some may have been too busy or distracted to notice him, but others saw him. And in those moments, he was reminded that even in his silence, he played a small but significant role in their lives. As the day turned into evening, the crowd slowly began to thin. The guard stood quietly, the sounds of the bustling city fading into the background. He thought about how he would always remain standing at his post, maintaining his composure and fulfilling his duty. The days blended together, and the royal guard continued his duties, but there was something inside him that had changed. He had spent years standing at his post, unmoving, silent, and often unnoticed. But now, every moment felt more significant, more connected to the world around him. He had begun to see his role not just as a protector of the palace, but as a quiet observer of the stories unfolding before him each day. One afternoon, as he stood tall in his usual spot, a small group of children approached. They were a school group, excited to visit the palace, their eyes wide with wonder as they gazed at the grandeur of the building. The children were playful, running ahead of their teachers, eager to explore. As they passed by the guard, one little girl stopped and looked up at him. She was small, with pigtails, and a bright smile that reached her eyes. She stared at him for a moment, taking in his uniform and stillness, and then spoke up. "Are you a hero?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. The question was so pure, so simple, and yet it stopped the guard in his tracks. He wasn't used to being asked such things. People often saw him as a symbol, a figure of authority, but no one ever asked him questions like that. The guard paused for a moment, looking down at the child with a gentle gaze. He didn't respond immediately. It was a question that deserved careful thought. Her teacher, noticing the pause, quickly stepped in and apologized. "I'm sorry, she's just very curious. She didn't mean to interrupt." But the guard, feeling the sincerity of the question, shook his head. He didn't want to dismiss her so quickly. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "A hero, huh?" he repeated, thinking for a moment. He didn't want to mislead her, but he didn't want to completely dismiss her view of him either. So, with a soft smile, he replied, "I'm just someone doing my job, standing guard." But maybe, sometimes, a hero isn't someone who saves the day. Maybe it's someone who does their part, no matter how small, and helps others feel safe. The little girl's eyes lit up at his words, and she grinned. "You're like a hero, then." The guard smiled back, his heart feeling a little lighter. It was a small exchange, but it meant something to him. It reminded him that, even in his quiet stillness, he was seen. To that little girl, he was more than just a soldier. He was a figure of respect and safety, someone who, in her eyes, was playing an important role in her world. As the children moved on, excitedly chatting about the next part of their tour, the guard stood there, reflecting on what had just happened. He had never thought of himself as a hero, at least not in the traditional sense. But in that moment, he realized that heroism wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic acts. Sometimes, it was about simply being present, doing your duty, and offering a sense of stability to those around you. For the first time in a long while, the guard didn't feel the weight of his uniform or the pressure of his duty. Instead, he felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't just standing there as a symbol of tradition or authority. He was standing there as a human, a part of the world, offering something simple but meaningful, a sense of calm and respect to those who passed him by. As the day turned into evening, the guard stood quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The crowds had thinned, and the palace grounds were growing quieter. The air was cooler now, and the evening light cast a soft glow over everything. The guard's thoughts wandered as he stood there, reflecting on the lessons he had learned in the past few weeks. He had always believed that his role was about discipline and tradition, about standing firm and unwavering. But now, he understood that it was about more than that. His role was about connection, about recognizing that, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, every person who passed by him had a story. And in his stillness, in his quiet presence, he was part of that story. He was a witness to their lives, offering them respect and a moment of peace. In return, they offered him their acknowledgement, their smiles, and sometimes their questions. The royal guard had always believed in the importance of duty, and that belief had not changed. But now he saw duty in a new light. It wasn't just about standing still, being a symbol of strength and tradition. It was about being a part of the world, about showing respect and kindness in the smallest ways, and understanding that sometimes the most meaningful connections happened in the quietest of moments. As he finished his shift and prepared to leave for the day, the guard felt a sense of contentment. His duty would continue tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. But now,